They called me a monster for killing my sick horse last year, the farmer muttered, staring at the empty stall. But tonight, it's knocking on my door. The farmer lived alone in a weathered farmhouse on the edge of a remote North African village. A year ago, he'd ended his horse's suffering in a way the neighbors still whispered about. Too quick, too brutal. Now, a storm raged outside, rattling the shutters. The horse's old halter hung on a rusted nail in the barn, untouched since that day. The farmer had buried the guilt deep, just like the body. But the past didn't stay buried. Not here, not ever. The farmer walked the perimeter of his small farmhouse, pulling shutters tight against the wind. Rain lashed against the stone walls. He checked the barn door, pushing his weight against it to make sure the latch held. The empty stall inside was a darker shadow in the gloom. He didn't look at the rusted nail where the halter hung. He turned back towards the house, his boots sinking slightly in the mud. He wiped his hands on his worn pants. Should have sold the damn thing, he grunted to himself, the words lost in a gust of wind. He stepped onto the small porch, reaching for the door handle. 3 heavy thuds hammered against the wood. Not the wind, not a branch. A deliberate, heavy knock. He froze, his hand inches from the handle. No one came out here. Not in this weather. Not after dark. Not after dark. Watch your steps in the dark. Beware, lest you wait. Death-friendly, dreaded ones. Dark forever. Dark. Dark forever. For how long does it dread? Dark forever. Dark forever. Dark steps. Always. Please, do not wait too late. Dark forever. In the night, if you're struck safe as you are being dreaded, make sure you get yourself prepared for dark and protection. Not after dark, here in North Boston country. Not after dark, in dark. Not after dark, in dark. Not after. The nearest neighbor was a kilometer away, across fields that would be flooded by now. The knocking came again, insistent. His heart hammered against his ribs. He stepped back, peering through the rain-streaked window next to the door. A figure stood on the porch, silhouetted against a flash of lightning. Too tall, too still. It didn't move, just stood there, facing the door. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice thin against the storm's roar. No answer. The knocking resumed, louder this time, more demanding. It sounded like it was trying to break the door down. He backed away from the window, stumbling over a small rug. He grabbed a heavy wooden chair from the corner and shoved it against the door, wedging it under the handle. His hands shook. This wasn't a lost traveler. This felt wrong, deeply wrong. He tried to breathe, telling himself it was just the wind playing tricks. A branch hitting the house. But the knocking was too regular, too strong. He went to another window, one that looked out towards the barn. He peered through the glass. Barn door was still shut. The wind howled, whipping the trees. He scanned the yard, looking for anything out of place. He saw it then, a dark shape near the barn. It wasn't the wind. It was moving, slow, deliberate. It moved towards the house. He ducked away from the window, his breath catching in his throat. He ran to the back door, checking the lock. It was secure. He checked the windows in the main room. All latched. The knocking stopped. Silence. The only sound was the relentless drumming of rain and the shriek of the wind. He stood in the middle of the room, listening. Every muscle was tense. Every muscle was tense. Then he heard it. A distinct scrape of metal on wood coming from the porch. He crept back to the window by the front door, peering through a crack in the shutter. The figure was gone from the porch. He strained his eyes, looking through the downpour. Something lay on the porch floor. Dark against the wet wood. It looked like ... He saw the glint of metal. The buckle. It was the halter. The horse's old leather halter. It lay there, just outside his door. He'd left it hanging on the nail in the barn. It couldn't have blown there. It was too heavy. His breath hitched. No, it can't be. The halter was frayed, stained dark with something he didn't want to think about. The leather looked thicker, somehow wet. A loud thud echoed from the porch. Something dropped onto the wood next to the halter. He squinted, trying to see. It was a clump of matted hair. Black hair. It twitched slightly, even in the rain. Flies buzzed around it, defying the storm. He stumbled back from the window, a strangled sound escaping his throat. His mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. None came. The figure was back on the porch. He could feel its presence outside the door, heavy and cold, even through the thick wood. He grabbed the axe, leaning against the wall near the fireplace. The handle felt rough in his sweaty palm. Drifter he muttered again, trying to convince himself. Lost, but the storm outside seemed to howl with a sound he remembered. The sound the horse made that night. A high, desperate whinny caught short. He raised the axe slightly. "Go away!" he shouted at the door, his voice trembling. The knocking stopped again. Silence returned, thicker than before. He waited, axe ready. Then, a scrape of metal against the door itself. Higher up this time, like something dragging claws down the wood. The sound was slow, deliberate, chilling. It stopped near the handle. He heard a wet, ragged breath through the wood. Too loud, too close. It sounded like it was right on the other side. Wait! Before I tell you what happens next. If your father ever made a sacrifice for you, hit like and subscribe right now. The doorknob stopped turning. A wet, ragged breath sounded through the wood, loud and too close, as if someone pressed their face against the other side. The farmer gripped the axe handle, his knuckles white. "Leave me be," he snarled, his voice tight with fear. A pause stretched, heavy and silent against the storm's fury. Then a voice, cracked and guttural, scraped through the door. "You didn't bury me deep enough." Glass shattered. The window next to the door exploded inward. A hand, slick with rain and something darker, clawed at the sill. The fingers were too long, unnaturally thin. The nails were split down to the quick, digging into the wet wood. The hand reached for the lock. The farmer stumbled back, swinging the axe blindly. The blade bit into the wall with a thud, embedding itself deep in the plaster. The hand didn't flinch. It continued to scrape, reaching for the latch. He clawed at the axe handle, trying to wrench it free. It was stuck fast. He backed away, his eyes wide, watching the hand. The storm outside screamed. He heard a sound like tearing fabric as the hand found purchase, pulling the window frame inward. He dragged a heavy wooden table across the floor, shoving it against the door. The wood scraped against the floorboards. He leaned his weight against it, panting. The visitor's shadow loomed on the curtains, stretching, warping into a shape with too many joints, too many angles. It was mercy, the farmer pleaded, his voice cracking. "You were suffering." The storm seemed to quiet for a moment. Then, from the other side of the door, the visitor mimicked the horse's last whinny, pitch perfect. A sound of agony cut short. It was a chilling, impossible sound. A barricade splintered with a loud crack. A heavy boot kicked through the wood, caked in mud from the grave. The farmer scrambled back as the door groaned inward. The chair and table pushed aside. The door burst open. A visitor stepped inside, dripping water and mud onto the floorboards. It wasn't a man, not anymore. Its face was a ruin of scars, the skin pulled tight over bone. Its mouth was sewn shut with coarse twine, thick stitches holding the lips together. "You silenced me," it rasped, the thread snapping with each word, a sickening pop. "Now you'll learn how it feels." It lunged forward, grabbing the farmer's wrist. The touch burned like dry ice, searing his skin. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out, only a strangled gasp. He clawed at his throat, his eyes wide with terror. His voice was gone. The visitor leaned in close, its breath reeking of turned earth and old blood. The halter was gone from the porch. Now it hung around the visitor's neck, the metal buckle clicking like a ticking clock against bone. The visitor's grip was unbreakable. It dragged the farmer across the floor, through the open doorway, and out into the raging storm. Mud sucked at his boots. Rain lashed his face. He stumbled, trying to pull away, but the visitor was too strong. It pulled him towards the barn, towards the empty stall that waited like an open wound. It dragged him through the storm, his boots carving furrows in the mud. The empty stall loomed ahead, its door swinging on broken hinges, groaning in the wind. Inside, the ground was sunken where the horse's body decayed. The visitor released him, pointing a long, skeletal finger at the disturbed earth. "You left me to rot," it whispered, the words slithering from its sewn mouth, the twine snapping with each syllable. The dirt shifted. A skeletal hoof burst upward, followed by a skull, still clad in rotting flesh, one eye milky and dead, the other glaring with impossible life. The horse's ribs rose and fell. No breath, just the mockery of it. The farmer collapsed, his hands digging into the mud as if to bury himself. The visitor knelt beside him, pressing the halter into his palm. The metal buckle was ice cold against his skin. The visitor produced a knife from its belt, its blade identical to the one used a year ago. It sliced the twine from its lips, revealing a gaping, toothless maw where its mouth should be. "Finish it," it hissed, offering the knife to the farmer. The farmer's throat worked, trying to form a sound. A strangled noise escaped, not words, but the ghost of the horse's final final scream, trapped and distorted, the skeletal horse lurched forward, its bones clicking like dry twigs. The visitor's grip tightened on the farmer's arm, forcing the knife into his trembling hand. Mercy this time, or join me. The farmer's fingers trembled around the knife handle. He saw his reflection in the horse's dead eye. A man already hollowed out by guilt, standing in the mud, facing the consequence of his act before revealing the farmer's fate. Would you take the knife or find another way? Comment below what you do in his place. The farmer raised the knife, his hand shaking. The visitor leaned in, expectant, its empty maw gaping. Instead, the farmer drove the blade into his own thigh, a scream trapped behind his teeth, tearing at his throat. Blood soaked the halter in his lap, mingling with the mud. The visitor recoiled, a sound like dry leaves rustling, escaping its throat. Coward, it spat, but a word lacked force. The skeletal horse collapsed into the mud, its bones scattering. The storm broke, the wind died down. Dawn bled through the clouds, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays. The visitor's form wavered, its edges dissolving like smoke in the rising light. You'll hear me in every storm. The visitor's final whisper echoed, fading with the last drops of rain. The farmer clutched the halter, his blood staining the leather dark. The buckle gleamed clean as if new. Villagers gathered at the farmhouse at dawn, drawn by the unnatural silence after the storm. They found the farmer sitting motionless in the stall, his hands caked with dried blood and mud. The halter rested in his lap, its leather darkened by his sacrifice. His eyes stared blankly ahead, wide with a terror that had nowhere left to go. A child tugged her mother's sleeve, pointing. Why won't he speak? The mother hushed her, pulling the child closer, her eyes fixed on the farmer's hollow stare. The village elder knelt beside the farmer, his face etched with concern. He touched the halter gently. This was the horse's, he murmured. The farmer's fingers twitched around the leather. The halter's buckle fell open, striking the ground with a metallic ping. The farmer's breath hitched, a sound like wind through a cracked door, the only noise his body could make. The elder recoiled slightly, looking from the broken halter to the farmer's face. The farmer's lips parted, but only a whisper of air escaped, rough and ragged. His throat was raw from screams no one heard, screams that had been swallowed by the storm and the horror. Days passed. The farmer was taken to a clinic in the nearest town, his silence unbroken. The villagers avoided the stall, but the children dared each other to touch its door, whispering stories. At night, they swore the wind carried the sound of hoofbeats, faint and mournful. A boy kicked the dirt where the horse's bones vanished, the spot now just a patch of darker earth. My dad says he deserved it, he muttered to his friend. His sister frowned, watching the empty stall. The farmer or the horse? Rain began to fall, soft at first. The first drop hit the boy's cheek, warm as blood. He wiped it, but his hand came away clear. Another drop fell. The stall door slammed shut on its own, groaning on its broken hinges. The children shrieked and fled, scattering across the muddy yard. Inside the dark stall, the halter's buckle gleamed faintly in the gloom, though no one had polished it. The farmer sat by a clinic window, staring out at the distant hills, seeing only the storm-ravaged fields and the empty space where his farm lay. A kind nurse placed a sketchpad and pencil in his lap. He picked up the pencil, his hand steady. He drew a single image, a horse, its ribs exposed, its eye alive with accusation, staring out from the page. The nurse sighed softly, watching him. You'll heal, she said, her voice gentle. The farmer's pencil snapped in his grip. Outside, thunder rumbled, a low, heavy sound, like a hoof striking earth. The drawing fluttered to the floor. The horse's inked eye seemed to follow the nurse as she left the room. The farmer pressed his palm to the glass, his eyes fixed on the sky. His reflection in the glass mouthed words, silent words that no one would ever hear. The storm outside, though distant now, seemed to drown them out anyway. The farmer's sketchbook lay open on the small table beside his bed. On the last page, a halter was drawn in perfect, agonizing detail. Every stitch, every stain, the gleam of the buckle. Beneath it, a single word